So good morning everyone and welcome to our Intelligent Automation webinar this morning. I'm Siobhan Martin from the Digital Office for Scottish Local Government and I'm joined by Gus Niven, Intelligent Automation Lead for the City of Edinburgh Council. Gus has kindly agreed to do this presentation today, exploring the key components of what to expect when setting up and delivering a robotic process automation programme. And he will also touch on the essential preparation and relationships to be built, defining goals and the necessity for realistic expectations. This webinar is part of our digital leadership work programme of the Digital Office, and from this webinar we hope to gauge interest in the topic and how we can progress this for the digital partnership. The presentation this morning will last around 15 to 20 minutes, and we will follow this up with a question and answer session at the end. So if you have any questions at all throughout the presentation, please use the chat box function to type in your questions, and myself and Gus will pick them up during the Q&A session at the end. Today's webinar will be recorded and be shared with all our attendees this morning and will be available on our YouTube channel to access at a later date. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Gus to begin his presentation, and I will chat to you later when we're doing the Q&A session. So over to you, Gus.
Okay, thanks, Siobhan. Good morning, everyone. As Siobhan has already mentioned, my name is Gus Niven. I'm the Intelligent Automation Lead and Head of the Centre of Expertise at the City of Edinburgh Council. And hopefully you'll find some of what I say over the next 15 to 20 minutes is useful. But please bear in mind that this is based on my personal experience working with Blue Prism over the past several months. So the team's been in existence for about a year now. We started on the 15th of March, give or take a day or two. And that consists of 5 members of council staff, including myself, and a varying number of additional staff provided by our automation partner, Ernst & Young, EY. We're working currently across the Customer and Digital Services Division, which is part of the Resources Directorate. Though, as this contains customer services and business support areas, we actually touch on a number of different divisions, including health and social care and place, which was services for communities. We've actually just been asked to go into HR, so that's another avenue that we're looking at the moment. So we currently have 19 live automations, with another 4 or so inbound by the end of this financial year. These include landlord registration, parking permit renewals, flexi-time adjustments, and discretionary housing payment applications, to name but a few. Actually, the parking permit renewals we're taking offline, but that kind of highlights the kind of tactical automations that you can put in. So there was a new system that they were waiting for to be delivered, but and unfortunately it was delayed, as these things sometimes are. So we put a tactical automation in for them, which has been running for, I would say, about 10 months, but they're now ready to move over to the new system, so we're taking that one offline. So some of these are full end-to-end process automations with little or no human intervention, but in the case of DHP, the automation actually passes the work over to the business team for assessment and decision making after we've done the initial processing, and when they've done their decision making, it then gets passed back to the automation to finish it off. So it's a true blend of traditional and virtual workforce. So truth be told, 12 months ago I hadn't heard of the term RPA before. But I had been searching for tools, and I've been building Excel macros in my old job. One of our responsibilities was providing directorate dashboards, and this was a very manual process when I took over the team. So I had started building tools, and when I heard about RPA, I knew it's something that I really wanted to get into. We found 4 other keen, resourceful and sharp-minded staff members to help deliver the programme, and in fact it's a real credit to them that they've taken to development like ducks to water. I mean, they really are amazing now, and good to point out that these guys and girls did not have any previous experience in coding or in IT. They were all business facing. Okay, so with that being said, I'd like to go over the key areas I think you need to have a look at when setting up and delivering an RPA project. So we're going to have a look at partnerships and preparation, stakeholder and business alignment, as Siobhan mentioned, achievable goals and realistic expectations. And I also want to touch on using the right language with the right audiences, and also understanding the concerns and fears that this relatively new disruptive technology can raise. Okay, so as most of us know, finding the right partner in any business endeavor can be a difficult task. And I suppose much like a personal relationship, the beginnings can often be filled with promises and declarations of what great and amazing things that the two of you can do. But sadly, sometimes these turn out to be no more than broken promises. And as we all know, certain things can turn bad. So it's vitally important that you choose your partnerships carefully in this, and that everyone understands what they're getting into, because the level of responsibility that flows across your different partnerships can spike and can trough. So it's really important that everyone's fully aware of what they're getting into. I think from my perspective, the number one consideration is that you build your own self-sufficiency. Now, we've established a centre of expertise, I think more commonly known as Centre of Excellence, but ours is the Centre of Expertise to deliver the automation programme. Now, I suppose you may choose to focus less on development and rely more on an automation partner. However, you still need to be fully involved in the process. But I suppose what I hear from time to time from my team and from my bosses is that process automation should be business-led. So you need to keep the knowledge front and center, and the business needs to own the project. Process software automation at its heart is really a low-code admin tool, okay? Capable of some truly game-changing efforts, but it's an admin tool nonetheless. Now, that doesn't mean the solution isn't complex, but due to its accessibility, the barrier to entry is much lower than traditional IT solutions. So you'll need to find an automation partner, and as mentioned, Edinburgh has teamed up with EY. If you're looking to set something up yourselves, you're going to rely on your automation partner to train your staff, and that training should include the technical development aspects, but also the ways of working methodology. And we're using agile principles with Scrum methodology running our sprint cycles. So with ICT, I can't overstate the necessity of a strong working relationship with your ICT provider. They essentially have the keys to the kingdom. Your ICT function needs to be fully committed to enabling your project and your team. They more than likely will set up your automation infrastructure and will provide you to an access to the majority of your business applications. And I suppose whether they're internal or external to your organization, it's highly likely that they will own the contracts for those application providers, and therefore you're going to have to go through them to make first contact. With web portals and platforms that are provided by public bodies, you should be able to go to them directly. And I suppose that brings us to application partners. Now, obviously, your main application partner will be whoever is providing your automation software. And as you can see on the slide there, we've gone with Blue Prism. There are others. There's UiPath, and there's I think it's called Automation Anywhere. However, we went for Blue Prism. Now, your business application providers may or may not be aware of process automation. I think most now, if they don't have a lot of knowledge about it, they certainly have. I've heard about it now. However, they may not have a fully educated viewpoint, either on its functionality, its abilities, or its limitations. Throughout the last year, I've had a number of conversations where I've had to explain that no, our virtual workers don't need access to the system back end, and no, they won't go rogue and start spamming users with inappropriate emails or messages or bring down their platforms. Some app providers seem to really welcome IA, intelligent automation or RPA, and they have no issue with virtual workers using their systems. I would say that the vast majority of people I've spoken to have welcomed us trying it, and they're very keen to kind of hear how we're getting on. Some will need to run the idea past their legal teams with regard to licensing. and the very, very few will give you a downright no. I would say that whatever the outcome, it pays to have those conversations as early as possible. And those conversations need to happen between people who understand the connections. So it's all very well speaking to a business person or a sales rep regarding that. But really you need the conversation needs to happen between the legal teams or the licensing teams. And sometimes they're very, very quick, and it's just a simple, yes, we have no problem with that at all, and then you can move on. I would say that we had one supplier who I'm not going to name, but they gave us an absolute no way. They actually came back later on with an offer that actually required us to buy new licenses at £7,000 per license with a minimum purchase of 5 licenses, so 35 grand. And that was for less than 1 year. And then they said the prices were going to be going up in 2019. Well, the contract for their software is actually up in 2019. I think procurement are currently running a procurement exercise to find a new supplier. And I suppose that brings an interesting avenue into it, and a consideration is that we're now baking this into our future contract requirements. So you set something up, you make sure that your procurement and contract teams are aware that they're going to need to build that into their requirements. Okay, preparation. Okay, so you've got partnerships established, and we're all going to do amazing things together. What you're going to need. So an infrastructure. So you need a secure infrastructure that will house your development and test and production environments and the associated virtual workers. I use the term virtual workers. Some people call them robots or bots or whatever else, but we use virtual workers here. And we're running a 225 configuration, which means that we have 2 virtual workers in the dev environment, 2 in the pre-production or test environment, and we have 5 working in the production environment. And we're due to do a capacity upscale later on in the year. So business applications, the ones that you're currently using, they're going to need to be installed into each of the environments to allow the virtual workers to run the appropriate processes. Though there are occasions that you may need to run applications locally. We've had to on physical development laptops. Sometimes that's due to the age of the application in question. But hopefully you'll be able to install everything onto your infrastructure. So you also want to make sure that your IT provider and the application providers are in sync. What you don't want to end up with is an empty warehouse, essentially a brand new infrastructure with no business applications. And also be aware that your application installs may take a lot longer than you expected due to procedural delays or security concerns. Basically, your intelligent automation team and infrastructure will amass a far greater access portfolio than any other part of your organization. So I would say expect a high degree of scrutiny and the associated timescales with that. So the pipeline is your process pipeline, and that will contain all your potential processes that have been assessed, validated, and prioritized. Now, these are going to come from your service teams, as they're the ones working those existing processes. But bear in mind that perceptions of appropriate processes will change over time as people become more aware and more involved, especially when you can show them a real-life demo that brings automation to life. I would say that conceptual explanations of intelligent automation are all well and good, but being able to show actual automations of real-life processes that people can understand has far more impact. And it goes without saying that you're going to need some operating guidelines of how, when, and why things happen across the development cycle. We're working with a 5-stage process that essentially leads you from an idea summary to a fully deployed automation. Now, your automation partner should have an established framework, but I would say remember that this is your program and that things will develop over time. And finally, on this slide is business change, which is massively important, but it's also one of the easiest things to get wrong. What I would say is start early, involve the business teams, and lean the processes where you can. This is dependent on the timescales, and it may not always be possible at the start, though you really should be working towards establishing a production line of continual improvement that can then lead into process automation. But all of us have resource constraints, so sometimes you need to jump in without having everything in place. Okay, so alignment. So as with all projects, stakeholders need to be aligned towards the common goal, and you're going to need to keep the key staff to drive the right message to the right people. You'll need clear communication channels, ensuring that this is a two-way street and that important information gets back to the development team for them to affect changes. Though I would say watch out for scope creep, where essentially you've established what the process is going to be, you build it, you test it, and right at the very end someone goes, oh, actually, it'd be great if it could do this. And that's actually a bit of an issue, so try and get all of those pieces of information out at the start. Now what you can do is you can build that process to the initial configuration or the initial requirement, and if there is additional asks of process development, you can build that into later development cycles, so you'll get something out of it. It may not be the 100% exactly what the people, the business team was wanting, but really you should be building to their original specification. But you can always add that into later cycles. I suppose in the case of the business support function that we're working with, the end user of the automation might not always been briefed adequately enough to be able to provide constructive feedback. So our MO essentially is to get up and go to that person's desk or that team's desk and have a real conversation. I suppose it's all too easy to hide behind emails and fire and forget. And with heavy workloads, this is always seen as a way to alleviate pressure. It's not really. What usually happens is that it lengthens the time scale for resolution and essentially chokes everyone's inbox up with emails back and forward. So it's what you might call a negative channel shift. So you're going to need a transparent prioritization of your pipeline, and it's going to be based on a set of criteria that you're going to establish. But that's going to enable those processes with the most benefit to the bubble to the top, essentially. Now, this is going to be dependent on a number of factors, but they'll include ready access to applications and operational considerations and timelines. So you may want to go into a certain system that's causing pain points and essentially is ripe for automation, but there may be the fact that application is due for an upgrade within 3 to 6 months. So actually building processes on that application isn't worth doing until the upgrade's happened. I suppose one of the most important considerations about intelligent automation as well is governance. You're going to need to establish a board to review progress and to lend support and guidance to the team. Also use this board as a method of escalation to deal with blockers, of which there will be many. And again, if you're finding that day-to-day interaction not really bearing fruit, make sure that there are the obstacle movers and shakers in the room, that they can go away and essentially finesse a way through the blockers. And I think many things can be dealt with simple, honest conversations that motivate rather than browbeat. We also live in GDPR reality now, and whether we like it or not, we're the keepers of massive amounts of data, and it's our duty to see that this is handled with care. So work closely with whatever information governance unit that you have, involve them in the project from the very start and listen to their concerns, because essentially if you establish a strong PIA delivery, it'll pay dividends in the future. Not only will you be seen as a proponent of best practice, in your organization, but when you find yourself in the need of fast-tracking a submission, they'll be more likely to help. And believe me, you'll need to fast-track submissions sometimes. Okay, I think probably the worst thing about setting unachievable goals is knowing that you're never going to manage to meet them, and that when you have unrealistic expectations, you always know you're going to be disappointed. So it's vitally important that when you're goal setting that you make them achievable. But I suppose the first question to ask is, what do we want to achieve? Is it savings? Is it capacity unlock, efficiencies, or improved customer journey? Is it all of the above? Just remember to keep those expectations realistic. I mean, all those things are achievable, but they may not all be achievable for every process that you're going to want to develop. So you need to decide how you're going to measure your success. So how long does it take to develop an automation? It's a tricky question to answer, but we found that the minimum amount of time is about 3 weeks to reach a minimum viable product. Now, this can mean a full automation, or it can mean a usable part of a larger automation that will require further development time, as I mentioned earlier. At Edinburgh, we're using essentially a 3+1 sprint structure, where we have a week in between sprints. Now, this is used for cleanup or enhancements, or if we find there's been some difficulties within the main body of the sprint to develop, we use that week as a kind of buffer. Okay, so we've developed an automation. How quickly can we get that process live? You should factor in user acceptance testing into your sprint planning, and you're going to need to get sign-off from the business teams that they're happy with the results. So essentially, through the development cycle, you build, you're interacting with that team to make sure that you're building the right thing, and by the end of it, that sprint cycle, you should have a process that you can essentially run UAT. And then at that point, they're going to say, yes, that's great, or no, it needs further work. But really, you shouldn't be getting to UAT stage for them to say, this isn't what we wanted. All the way through the process, you should be interacting with the team. You're also going to need a PIA sign-off, or we call them DPIA here, need to be signed off by the information asset owner. And that process is then going to need to move through the environments ready for production run. So one thing that we found is that there are slight differences between test systems and live systems. A lot of the time, people will say, you know, oh no, there's no difference. It's a copy of the live system. But sometimes there's differences. We found that there's differences in HTML code, or application buttons can sometimes be in different locations. Now these need to be respied. Spying is something that happens within your development. The Blue Prism itself has it as an application modeler, and you essentially train the virtual worker to recognize application windows, buttons, fields, all that kind of stuff. So moving from a test system to a live system, sometimes there can be little vagaries there that make the automation need to be essentially stepped through when you move into a production environment. I suppose the most important thing to understand is that also it's not going to happen overnight. Again, keep those realistic expectations. We found that essentially it's about a 6-week minimum to take an automation from start of development to go live. So language, this is one of my bugbears, I guess, and I actually was invited to go down to a conference in London, and it was called March of the Bots 2018, which I think is, well, March of the Bots is unnecessarily militaristic, I think, and doesn't engender a workforce really embracing robotic process automation, if you're going to put it into those terms. So yeah, I think the terminology that has been built up around process automation isn't really doing itself any favors, and specifically for me, robot and RPA. Now, robot actually comes from a Czech word meaning drudgery or servitude, which I suppose is an apt moniker for some of the types of manual processes that we're looking at. But robot, more often than not, conjures up images of, reports of how many jobs are going to become obsolete in the next 20 years, or it's Terminators, or it's, I just think it's unnecessary. So I think when you're beginning to discuss this with people, you can use RPA, you can use robotic process automation, but when you're actually talking about the actual software, I think the virtual workers to us seems to reinforce the idea that they're actually part of the existing team, part of the existing workforce. They're essentially doing the heavy lifting of high volume transactions, and they're freeing up valuable time and resource. We prefer to use the term intelligent automation instead of RPA, as intelligent automation has a wider remit that's not just limited to process automation. So again, trying to keep our options open when we're looking at the future. And I suppose my own personal view is that it's extremely smart technology, this. and it's impressive enough without slapping a Star Wars name on it. Okay, and finally, I guess we fear what we don't understand. So essentially, we need to bring that knowledge into the light, and process automation can release a huge amount of valuable time to enable our colleagues to concentrate on what matters. And to me, it's human relationships that matter. And they matter because they allow us to do things more productively and more efficiently, and therefore our cities can run more efficiently and smoothly. Isolation, disenfranchisement leads to separation and a lack of care. And I suppose we can't forget that, you know, each time there's a move forward in automation, there's a similar negative reaction, and essentially that's been happening since the Industrial Revolution. So if we understand that there will be opportunities for staff to retrain and to develop new skills, but some staff, they're going to want to see the program fail. So I would say that try at all costs to celebrate the fact that, you know, intelligent automation essentially is enabling the refocus of resource, time, and effort into those necessary positive, you know, human relationships and interactions. So I would say the last 12 months have been extremely demanding. And the learning curve across the board has been really steep. And with some frustrating delays and some difficult circumstances, we've managed to succeed in delivering a program of work that is bringing real benefit to the council. And I would say, I can say with all honesty, that intelligent automation should be a core part of new ways of working and structures in our public organisations. So I'll just close out with one of EY's 6 key lessons, which is create new structures and entities to drive innovation, build agile and anonymous teams, engage and collaborate with external bodies and stakeholders, which includes, you know, all the other public organizations that we discuss and speak to on a day-to-day basis. You know, put the customer front and center, learn from the disruptors, and focus on the next stage of the journey, because it's always a development. New technology will be coming along. There may be time in the near future where we start utilizing parts of AI. So essentially, it's just keeping an open mind. Anyway, that's my presentation done. So hopefully you found that interesting and useful.
Thanks very much, Gus. I certainly found that very interesting. So as we said at the beginning, we'll move on to a question and answer session just now. And we'll give our attendees a couple of minutes here just to type in anything that they may have to ask you. I would say that if there's anything that crops up after the webinar that you may want to ask Gus or the digital office herself, then please don't hesitate to get in touch afterwards. So while we're giving you a couple of minutes to type your questions in here, as I mentioned earlier on, this webinar is part of our leadership programme of work at the digital office here, and it's been identified through our Open Innovation project, which is actually led by Gus's colleague Sally Kerr, who's the Digital Innovation Manager at the City of Edinburgh Council, and also Dr. Colin Birchinall, who works for the digital office as the Chief Technology Officer. So yeah, this is part of a number of webinars that we're going to be running for this project. Our next webinar is actually next week with Stirling Council, and we'll hear from one of their heads of service, Isabel McKnight, on the work that they have been doing with CivTech. And she will explore that in more depth, and that's sort of around the use of technology to help improve their services by better understanding like investment requirements for their public buildings in Stirling. So we will circulate the registration information for that to our attendees today, if that's something that may be of interest for you. We also would encourage that if anyone here today is working on something similar that Gus has been talking about today, or is more interested in looking at sort of partnership working with other councils to develop develop projects or processes, then please do get in touch, because we do have an insight service that we can link like-minded people together, or we can look here at the digital office at creating a project that may suit your requirements. So we will circulate information again afterwards for a couple of the different things mentioned today. We'll circulate Gus's slides as well afterwards, so that may spark a few questions. Another quick shout out we have today is around the Scottish Enterprise Can Do Fund. Scottish Enterprise have asked us to mention that their deadline for their applications is on Friday the 29th of March. And the Can Do Innovation Challenge Fund is around maybe having a problem within your organisation that you can't quite find or buy a solution for, and it's not available on the market. It may be a challenge that is hindering the quality of service that you're delivering, or your ability to meet your policy objectives. So we'll circulate information about that also after this webinar. But as I said, the deadline for that is Friday the 29th of March, and that can be very useful. That can be very useful for you. So enough of me talking. We'll move on to the question and answer session. There is a couple of questions here for you, Gus. So the first one from our attendee is: do you recommend in-house IA developers?
Absolutely, yeah. So what you can, there are models out there where you can actually buy in this service, and EY themselves, I think, do it. But there are other consultancies out there who essentially will come in and develop for you, and then host it as a kind of software as a service. But I would heartily recommend essentially bringing people up from your current workforce, training them up, and getting them in to develop. Essentially, you're building your self-sufficiency that way, and you're not beholden to an external contractor. Again, with software kind of moving at the rate it does in the private market these days, you may not always want to be using the same piece of software. But if you've already built a team up that is kind of au fait with one type of process automation software, then they'll be more likely to be able to pick up new pieces of software, so essentially strengthening your ability to be flexible in the future.
That's great, thank you. Are Edinburgh doing anything within the revenues and benefits services?
We so currently we are working with, as I mentioned in my presentation, we're working with customer services, which has the customer services and business support functions, and those guys do quite a lot of stuff for revs and bends. So we are looking at DHP currently, and direct deductions, former tenancy arrears, and such like. So we are looking at doing more stuff with revs and bends. Essentially, what makes a good process is that it's transactional. It's repeatable, and it follows a set of business rules, essentially logic. So if you have staff members that are currently running through transactions that really don't need a huge amount of judgment, that essentially are following a script, then you can automate it. And even if you do have judgment calls or decisions to make, as with a couple of our processes, we're doing the heavy lifting to begin with, to process the data. We're then handing it over to the teams to do their part, and the teams are handing it back to us.
Fab, that's great. You may have touched on this ever so slightly in your presentation, but one of the attendees is looking for you to expand on some examples of the areas of council services that have been automated already.
Yeah, so the easiest way to think about it is if you have an area that has a huge amount of transactional volumes coming through, then you can automate those processes. So we are currently doing flexi-time automation. So essentially updates to staff flexi accounts. We're moving into looking at the HR stuff. So that would be all the forms that are coming through for change of working hours or new starts, leavers. We are working with the landlord registration team, but also we're dealing with the Ed Index part of their remit, so the social housing. So what I can do is I can send out the areas that we're currently working with and the automations that we're currently live and that we're reviewing, if that would be the best thing.
So that sounds good. I'm sure that'll be very useful. And another question just came in as you were speaking there around if you're working on procurement and catalogue content management and automating any of the processes.
That is that's my old team, catalog content management. We're not currently looking at that, but it may be something that we look at in the future. There are a number of things there that you could automate. I suppose, just thinking off the top of my head, if you had supplier maintained catalogs, or at least supplier who was providing the content for your catalogs, then you could be validating that before it went in. Now, obviously, it's dependent on how tightly the organization controls its finance system. So I would say that some people would be, I would say, less risk averse to have a virtual worker operating within the financial system than they would within, a customer relationship management system. And that's just down to people being a bit squirrely about financial things. But again, if you have a set of business logic or business rules that are currently, ruling over your current catalog management process, then again, you can automate it. If there's judgment calls or there's further investigation that needs to be done, then that can be done by a traditional member of staff. But saying that, what we're looking to do for a pilot for business support and procurement is to look at non-catalog requests. Now, what can happen is that you can gain a huge amount of non-catalog requests, essentially because sometimes your catalogs aren't maybe as up to date as people would like them to be, or perhaps that the core items within a supplier's catalog don't really fit the bill anymore. So your level of non-catalog requests increases. But what you can do with an automation is essentially highlight those using export reports from your procurement system and highlighting who's submitted those non-catalog requests, and essentially email them out and say, we've noticed you've done a non-catalog request for a cataloged supplier. Can you tell us why? And essentially what you can do is provide a link to a document where people can just use a drop down to put in a reason why they had chosen that non-catalog request item, and then that can be fed back in, either back to the procurement team or the contracts team, contract management team, or it can go directly back to the supplier, as long as you've had the conversation about you're going to start receiving a monthly dashboard on how people are getting on with your service.
That's great. Thanks very much. I'm just conscious of time here again. So the other question that was in here is around sort of your biggest challenge to date. Could you sort of summarise and close on that question?
Yeah. Okay. So the biggest challenge, coordination. I think that's the biggest challenge. I mean, whatever you try and do, when you're trying to do projects within any organization, there's always challenges. It's getting the right stakeholders, getting the right people in the room that can make the decisions, and there's quite a lot of moving parts here. Not only do you have a piece of software that you're using that is fairly non-traditional within public organizations, and you're having to link that into business teams and information governance and into existing governance rules, and then your ICT provider, whether or not they're an external, we have an external provider, but we also have an internal ICT team. So there are a lot of stakeholders, and it's coordinating all of those together to try and move at a rate of speed. Essentially, what you don't want to do is for this to turn into, a 12-month, 18-month slog where at the very end of it, things don't work. The sprint sort of methodology or principles is that you can call it failing fast or succeeding fast. You do a three-week sprint cycle, and at the end of that whether things have worked. Well, in fact, long before the end of that cycle. So traditionally, public organizations aren't used to moving at speed, and I think it makes people nervous. But if you keep the lines of communication open, if you try and coordinate as much as possible, then people start, essentially getting with the program in terms of wanting to work at that pace. But other organizations that interact with you don't have that level of involvement. So whilst you might want to be moving forward at a pace and getting applications put on your infrastructure, and you're doing all your governance and all that, and you've got things set out as a roadmap, other organizations, well, okay, you can have that application on your infrastructure, but really it's going to take 6 months for us to do it. So I would say the biggest frustration is trying to coordinate everyone to delivering in the timescales that you need to.
That's fab. Gus, just bouncing quickly back to the question around the procurement and the content management. One of our attendees has said that they're sort of looking at some projects across procurement in NHS Scotland. So they would be quite happy to share any lessons learned there. So that's a good example of sort of partnership working there. We can pull you guys together and see how you can develop and learn from each other.
That would be fantastic. Yeah. And I think that's the thing. There's the definite need for all of us in public organisations is to work together and share this knowledge. We don't want to build a little fiefdom of intelligent automation. We want to spread this far and wide so that people can, also reap the benefits that we've started with here.
Yeah, definitely. And I think from experience and hearing from other local authorities within the digital partnership, there isn't actually a specific focus among some of the local authorities on intelligent automation. So I'm sure this will build a good bit of interest and maybe a bit more resource into this specific area of work.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we have gone out and spoken to a number of different and hosted a number of different local authorities. So we're very keen on speaking to people, very keen on showing people as well. If anyone would like to come and have a visit and see the team and see what we do, just drop me an email.
That's fantastic. I think we'll wrap up there today. You will receive an email later on this afternoon just with some materials from today's webinar. And we'll pass a couple of bits and bobs over to Gus as well that's come in during the Q&A session, and we can see how we can talk further on some of those. So hopefully we'll see some of you on our webinar next week with Sterling. I'll circulate that information in the email as well, so you can register for that. And just like to close by thanking Gus ever so much for his time today. Sure you'll all agree his presentation was great, and we hope that you have taken away a lot from that presentation. And also a huge thanks to the City of Edinburgh Council for providing time for Gus to do this, and that's on behalf of the Digital Office for Scottish Local Government. So thanks very much, Gus, and we'll close up there and we will see you all soon.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks.